that the numbers don't lie. So you can, I remember distinctly every Monday morning getting to the locker room, watching the film, and all my teammates would mock me because they say you would make a block and then you would turn in a circle. I said, no, I don't turn in circles, that's silly. And then we watched the film and I'd make a block and I'd turn in a circle. So you may think we're doing one way, when in all reality, we're not doing that way, we're doing an actual different way. So that's the purpose of the numbers. I emailed, everybody get the email? This is kind of late, sorry. I didn't want you dwelling on it all week long. So some of you looked over a little bit, we'll look over most of it tonight. I put it in a PowerPoint presentation to send back out so you don't have to take copious notes. So I can email this PowerPoint to you. I didn't give you an agenda because all we're going to do is go through the PowerPoint and that's it. It may feel like a fire hydrant and we're not going to solve any problems tonight. We're just going to look at what is. So just know that going in. Next time we meet, we'll take all of this and then develop some plans from there. So let's begin with some prayer and then we'll get started going through the content. Father, we're thankful for this time together, and I'm just so thankful for this team and the work that they've done spiritually to get themselves aligned and in tune with what it is that you would have for them as a part of this team, and more importantly, Lord, for our church as we look forward into the future for what it is that you would have our church to be about and to set as goals and a vision for the future. We want to see with your eyes, and we want to believe with big faith in what it is that you could do if you chose to do it. And so we pray tonight would be fruitful towards those ends. We want you to guide us to the truth and to not only show us what is, but to show us what to do with that information. And so be our discerner tonight by your Holy Spirit. Give us the grace that we need to do this well. I know many of us are tired and it's been a long day, but we want this time to be worshipful and want to know that you are with us and your presence is here. And so help us to be sensitive to that and to respond to your leading however you choose. And we pray these things in Jesus' name. Amen. All right. Tonight's going to just be a look at the health. Make sure everybody's got the handouts. You got statistical tables, everybody? If you didn't, I've got a few extra copies. Anybody not get one of these? Lisa, you good? You got one? Okay, the other handout was the map. Does everybody have the map? Okay. Then the third handout is the census document. Everybody got that? Okay, good. You need the census document? Or is there any census document ones left over?
No. I gave you one.
Sue didn't get one?
No, Judy didn't get one.
All right. So we'll start with the statistical data, and you can follow along in the packet, but I put, I think, the most relevant details in the PowerPoint. And so you can kind of walk along with me through the packet, and you'll see it on the PowerPoint. Worship attendance has been steady growth, but it has been slow growth, but it has been steady. You can notice different patterns at 11 o'clock, 9:40, 8:25. You'll see this page there, how it's lined out in different ways. You see a decrease in 11 o'clock attendance from 2008 to 2015. And you see how it decreases there from 149 down to 108 at 2015. There has been a turn here lately, so there's a trend going back upward, but that's what that is. 940 has been almost opposite. It started out 159 and is now up to 205. That's the whole year's average attendance. That doesn't account for this fall. So this fall, we're consistently running over 230 right now. So I think that by the time we get done with the end of the year, that the 940 is going to look much more like a 220, 225 average than a 205. 825, same kind of story. It went from 138, now it's at 162. I think it'll show up a little bit stronger by the end of this year because we haven't accounted for the fall attendance from September to December, and usually the fall is peak season for church attendance. So I wouldn't say it's rapid growth. It's up and down, but it's slow and steady. And if you were going to categorize us, I think we would be categorized as a plateaued church. Not a growing church, but a plateaued church. Maybe put us between plateaued and growing. Some years we grow very rapidly, like when 2013, we grew about 20%, just new members in attendance, but then it went right back down the next year. And so it's just up and down, years of growth, years of shrinkage. So that's why I'd say it's plateaued, but it is incrementally growing, so it's barely a growing church. Baptisms, this is a different story. There's good growth there. You can see the church is beginning to reach younger families. 2015 will by far be our best year when it comes to baptisms. You can see that there's younger families being reached because of the number of younger adults being baptized. I think it's like 5 years and younger. No, the age is 6 to 11. And so you can see how that's a pretty big demographic. And we had a couple 5-year-olds get baptized this year as well with Ammon's boys. One of them's 5, one of them's 6, about to be 6. A Bible study, small groups. Small groups, there are more groups. We added the midweek groups, and so that elevated the number of actual groups that we had. There's a stronger 11 o'clock attendance. We had a shrinkage in the 9:40 hour. There's big growth in preschool. So by far, preschool is the biggest area of growth when it comes to Sunday morning classes. Everybody see how that plays out on the Bible study at 11. Bible study at 9:40. You see preschool at 11, how there's been a tremendous growth there. Major events, notice as you look at the major events side of your statistical table packet, with transition there is a change in attendance, whether up or down. Transitions affect attendance. You see it in youth, you see it in the music. Music stylistic changes in the music. We had a different music pastor come on. You see the difference when I came on in 2007. The 940 band came on. There was a change in attendance in the 940. Transitions just create change, good or bad. It affects the attendance. 11 o'clock music transition resulted in a decrease. At the beginning, there was a rapid decrease in the 11 o'clock, but it seemed to turn around. That decrease at 11, they didn't leave the church. They went to the 825 service, and so that bumped 825 service attendance up. So that you see that all reflected in statistical tables. Roger and Ora have both experienced significant growth in 2015, specifically the fall of 2015. The only reason I mention it is because it's not normal, the kind of growth that they've seen in 2015. You don't see those reflected on our sheets, but children's, what did y'all have last Wednesday? 71 kids, as opposed to maybe 40 average attendance last spring. Youth started out with 90, they had 98 at Fields of Faith. It's uncommon to have lower than 70 now, whereas, is that about right? Whereas last spring it was uncommon to have over 50. So big increases in both children and youth, and you see that reflected, or you don't see that reflected here. I just want to point that out. Physical profile, we've got acreage for up to 110 in attendance at main campus, but we only have parking for 454 people on our campus at the same time. Now, if we grew to 810, they wouldn't all be here at the same time, but a lot of them would be, and we're pretty well, I think, tapped out on parking as far as what we do have at 940 and 11 currently. We're architecturally full at 212 people. The 940 service regularly breaks 230. Every Sunday for the past 4 Sundays has been over 230. We had 256 today, for example. There's 358 chairs in the worship center, but you see how David broke down. It's a 20-inch chair, but these days it's suggested that when you run your, whether or not you're full or not full, they run it at 27 inches, not 20. People are bigger than they used to be, and people like more space than I guess they used to like. So really, 940 service, we're full. We're over full almost every Sunday. 825, getting close. Sometimes it's up to 180, 175. 11 o'clock, still got a lot of room for growth. It is uncommon to break 130 there. See the map for the overview of the properties that we own and potential expansion. I'll show you this map. Pastor David did a little bit of work showing you the properties. Won't spend a lot of time on this. We're in the process of buying this big lot and this house right here. So here's the church, right? Main campus, ed building, We own the rent house directly behind this education building. We don't own the one after that. Then we own the one on the corner next to the alley. Annex B is across the parking lot over there. Of course, all this is our parking here. We do not own this 8950. See how it's got the lines marked at it? That means we don't own the house, but it is right next to the alley. So this is a property that would be strategic for us. This property over here on the corner to the west of the main campus or the preschool wing, we don't own that. We don't own the small brick house between the two parking lots. We do own Annex A. We don't own 7020 either. Yeah, we didn't buy that. I don't know why it doesn't have that marked out. We do own a rent house though, a rock rent house there where it says 6480. We just bought, like I said, this big lot behind there, so it's got a fence around it. It's a huge lot. It's got a fence built around it. We're in the process of buying that with the property. This is where the community gardens and stuff is. We've got parking lots on either side of Annex A. And we own the two-story house right there on South 27th, and then we own a little vacant. We own a vacant house. It's a greenhouse right next to the two-story house. And so we own both of those. So ideally, we would be able to create some parking over here with this extra lot. And of course, we've got those two houses that we can knock down, build around the community garden. And that should give us enough space to solve our parking problem should we choose to go that route. So everybody got a pretty good idea of what we own, what we don't own around the church. How many of you didn't know that we owned any of that? It's all new. Okay, Jeff?
I was going to say, we do own 7020, that's the parking. 6480 is that next house. Then we
own 7020.
Yes, that's the parking area.
Oh, okay. Okay, I get it.
Yeah.
So 7020 is parking, not a house. Gotcha.
Yes.
Any other questions on the property? All right, so the church owns enough acreage to facilitate the growth that it has right now very easily. On your sheet it says that we need, what was it? We got 6.8 acres, and they rule of thumb is 1 acre for every 125 in attendance. We can, at the main campus, get up to 810 with the current acreage that we have, but it's not all just vacant acreage. A lot of it is houses, and we have to knock down the houses and so on and so forth. Per capita giving, this is encouraging. Broadview, compared to the national average, is generous, but it's discouraging when you look at the national average. The national average of church giving is $26 per person. I think that's, last study I did, most church members give less than 2% of their annual income. And, it is what it is. But take the really bad scenario that we have in the United States when it comes to giving, and we're more generous than the really bad scenario. So that's good. I don't know that we should feel real good about it. You don't want to measure yourself up over against the national average. You want to measure yourself over against yourself, and that's where I think it is encouraging, because Broadview has grown in generosity. Its growth in generosity outpaces its growth in worship attendance, which I think is really good indication that people are becoming discipled. People are beginning to worship the Lord with their giving. There hasn't been a huge increase in our worship attendance, but there has been significant increase in our giving year after year after year. So that's a encouraging sign. This year we're set to break $1 million for general receipts, which is mind-blowing to me to think about. You can see that on the back of your page. When it comes to giving, you can see the general receipts, how they all lined up. Debt retirement is low. The giving to debt retirement is low, and the reason for that is because the extreme makeover campaign that we did was a 3-year commitment, and that commitment ended, I think, last year. So all of last year and this year, the giving to debt retirement has just been totally because they want to, not because they've committed to it or obligated to it. And so it's been pretty low. So unless or until we do another giving challenge to maybe try to pay off debt, it'll probably stay pretty low. Any questions on giving? Before we...
What is our debt?
Our debt, I guess I should have ran that off. It's It's right at $500,000 if you include the rental properties. The first financial loan is at $433,000, give or take. That's the loan that we used to build the gathering place, and then we paid it down, and then we built the preschool wing, and then we paid it down to $433,000. Any other questions on debt?
I guess I have a question. So in the general fund, when it's used up, do you put it over to the budget, to the debt, or do you just?
That's a finance team discussion. So we have net income at the end of the year. Finance team talks about what to do with the extra monies. Sometimes yes, sometimes no. All right, any questions so far? Am I moving too fast? I'm not trying to blow through this, but some of this is relevant, but not relevant. This is the census document. I ran off the sheet. You can read this in detail if you want. It's pretty interesting. I just tried to pull out some salient details. 111,000 people, 112,000 people live in the defined study area. That's an increase from 2000 by 2.7, which not surprising because the national average rose about the same thing, a little bit less, but about that. It's projected to grow another 3,628 car cents, or 3.2%, which is a little lower than the national average rate of growth. It's extremely high lifestyle diversity. So 44 of the 50 lifestyle segments are represented. What are those lifestyle segments? They're very confusing and I don't understand them. Basically, there's like urban survivor, and then there's country person, and there's hillbilly person, and there's mountain man person, and a lot of different profiles, in the U.S. Well, here in this little 5-mile radius, there's a lot of diversity. Basically, what I'm trying to say. Extremely high racial diversity. There's a 61.3% representation of Anglos, 26.2% representation of Hispanics. Asians are set to grow to 14.4% by 2020. Of course, if you crunch those numbers, that doesn't match 100. That's over 100%. But that's accounting that this group here, the Asians, are going to grow. And you see that with the refugee makeup that we have in the apartment complexes. And really, Abilene's a refugee city. Many of those refugees from Asian countries. Millennials are the dominant group. Millennials are aged 14 to 33. They form 33% of the group. The national average is 27.2. So we've got a higher percent of millennials in our community than what is nationally trending. The non-traditional family structures. We're below average when it comes to the marriage rate. There's a lot of single-parent homes. Lower average of college graduates than the national average. So the people who are living in our community, less of them graduate college than do nationally. So we've got more college dropouts, if that's a thing, than you do generally in America. Major concerns for those people are finding a good job. A lot of them are divorced. The statistics for single moms in this area is through the roof higher than national average. So a lot of people want marriage help. A lot of people want help with getting through their divorce. Extremely high when it comes to seeking spiritual teaching. I don't know if that's because we're in the South and there's a little bit of the Bible Belt left over, but pretty higher degree than national average when it comes to that. A lot of substance abuse, a lot of pursuit of achieving educational objectives. Because there's been a lower amount of college graduation, there's a lot of people who want to go to college and they want to hit career goals educationally in that way. So pretty interesting stuff. Likely faith involvement is somewhat high compared to the national averages. There's a bit more interest in religion than there is nationally. Average income is about $58,691 per year. Some of you are thinking, man, I wish I could make that. That's up to you or not. But that's the average income for Abilene, Texas, at least a 5-mile radius of this location. Religious giving potential is very low. So they have studies of how much money a person makes and how much percentage that amount of money having been made gives to religious causes. People who are this poor tend to give very little to religious organizations. So the giving potential is low. 15.9% higher than the national average of single moms. This is really interesting. 6.2% lower national average of married couples. So generally speaking, there's a lot of non-married people, single moms, stuff like that, living around here. And 11.1% higher divorce rate than the national divorce rate, which itself is already pretty high. Well, it's even higher in Abilene. This was interesting. The majority of households prefer Baptist as a religious preference, right next to Catholic. So if you're going to be religious, you're going to probably be a Catholic or a Baptist. I'd say that's interesting. We are in Abilene, Texas. There is not just a church on every corner. There's a Baptist church on every corner. So that's the church statistical table and the census information. Very interesting. Generally, pretty positive. Any questions so far? How many of you saw something you didn't expect to see? All right. Now we're going to move to the spiritual health survey. This was the transformational church survey we asked the church to take. There was 94 people that took the survey. That makes it statistically reliable, but not great. So they know I registered for 500 to 1,000, and they only give us 375 assessments because they just know that between 500 and 1,000 attendance, only 375 are going to take the survey. So we're on the low end of that 1,000, which means we're probably on the low end of that 375. It would have been better to have 150, maybe 200, but it is what it is. It's still statistically reliable. Generally speaking, there was a good response for those who responded. You have the 34 extra registered without completing. I don't know why that is. Maybe they just got to taking a survey and didn't like it. Low points were prayerful dependence, relational intentionality. That's their way of saying discipling relationships, whether that's getting involved in a small group or that's personal one-on-one discipleship, group discipleship, moving from just being a Christian to a Christian who is on mission, doing things, growing as a disciple. We got low points there. Low points on prayerful dependence, low points on discipleship, and then low points on a missionary mentality. Not that we don't go out and do mission trips, but that we are generally not very evangelistic in our day-to-day lives. So, low points there. High points on worship, high points on community, fellowship, I feel so loved, etc., etc. Mission, going out and doing mission, and leadership. Pretty good confidence in the leadership of the church. Now what I did is I'm going to break down those low points, and I went through and took every question which got a 65% or higher negative response or a 20% or higher, I hate this is terrible response. Those are red flags, and the assessment flags them and says you need to focus here. And so I took every question that the assessment flagged and I threw it on the screen, and we'll look at those and then we'll talk about it. First one on worship. Low points on worship where people regularly make decisions to obey God as a result of our worship services. It's one of two things. Either 20% said, I strongly disagree that this happens, or 65% or less answered in the affirmative. So it didn't quite get to 66% or 70% who were strongly in agreement. You had a weak showing. So they're basically saying, well, I don't want to say that we're no good at it, but I don't want to say we're good at it either. They're kind of tending towards this is a problem. Okay, does that make sense to everybody? So when it comes to that mood, this deal of people making decisions to obey God as a result of a worship service on Sunday morning, pretty low. People at our church spend time worshiping personally throughout the week. How the person knows what other people do, I don't know, but that's
we don't actually know how many are making decisions.
yes, those are all good points. So if you think the question is a little misleading or a little difficult to answer, we'll take that into consideration as we move forward. Because I agree. Some questions. Okay, third one. Our church members often bring friends with them to our worship services. A little bit of the same thing, but is our church services unchurch friendly? Are they friend friendly? That kind of thing. Low points. Low points on community. Church members are expected to serve in a ministry at our church. Scored low there. Our church helps people understand their spiritual gifts. Low point there. Talked about that here before. New members are challenged to begin serving right away. Low points there. Low points on mission. Our members are comfortable sharing their faith with unbelievers. Low points. Gets to evangelism, one of our weakest points. Our church celebrates when members serve the local city or community. Our church has a system in place to raise up future leaders. Now we're shifting from evangelism to leadership development. This, I think, also relates to discipleship, disciple making. They would say, we don't believe our church has a system in place for raising up future leaders. When it comes to prayerful dependence, this is one of our lowest points. It was the lowest point on the survey, was this sense of dependency on God. I often hear people talk about God's activity in their life related to prayer. There's a lot of that talk around here. People in our local city or community often ask us, people in our local city or community ask our church to pray for them. Can y'all read this in the back? Okay. Seeing people praying together is a normal sight at our church. People say no. A system is in place to transmit prayer requests to our church. No. Our church teaches people how to pray in their daily lives. Moments of spontaneous prayer in worship services, groups, or classes are normal within the life of our church. Low points. More prayerful dependence.
Up there on the one about, people in the community asking our church to pray for them. I think a lot of times people in church don't realize how much of that goes on because they're not here every day.
Right.
Because
Could
those
be.
of us that are here every day, we see a lot of that. And so I think that's really an answer. They just aren't equipped to
Right.
know.
Well, account for that kind of thing, and when we talk about it, we'll talk about all that. We don't want to jettison criticism because we have an explanation for it, but we don't want to unfairly accuse ourselves of something that we're actually doing well. So doing that's difficult sometimes. People in our local city or community often ask our church to pray for them. Seeing people praying together, I've already done this.
Yeah.
These are low points on discipleship. If someone desires to serve in the ministry at our church, there is a clear and easy step to begin serving. Now, I am up here every day, and I know that's a weak point.
Yes.
Newcomers to our church are tactfully yet purposefully connected to a small group. Low points there. There is a culture of inviting at our church where people are constantly invited by others to get connected on a deeper level. The majority say no. Our church has a clearly defined, talked about this today, a clearly defined discipleship process for moving a person from salvation to spiritual growth to significant ministry. This actually had both less than 65% and more than 20% strongly disagree. Very weak area. Our church constantly challenges people to take the next step in the discipleship process. When people become members of our church, someone is personally available to help them connect further at our church. Explanations there when deacons go to the church, but before you explain things away, the other thing you want to consider is that just because we have an answer to the problem doesn't mean that our solution is widely communicated or that the church is aware of it, which itself is just as big a problem as having a problem. So those are the ones on discipleship. Low points on mission-mindedness. Everything we do is intentionally stated in the language and culture of the people we are trying to reach. The activities of our church are designed to relate to the type of people who live in our city or community. Our church is innovative and entrepreneurial in serving non-Christians outside the church. People would say no. Our pastor often refers to aspects of the local city or community in messages. Low points there. Mission-mindedness. Our church members are frequently reminded about the unique opportunities to impact those who live in the city or community surrounding our church. The church views itself as existing for the sake of those in our local city or community. The needs of our city or local community inform our local mission strategy. Leaders at the local institutions such as schools, government agencies, etc. have expressed gratitude that our church is in the community. And lastly, engagement. About 4.4 times a month people go to a worship service. I don't know how they're going to more services than we have in a month, but pretty high. This one's equally depressing. 2.51 people is the average number of gospel presentations to another person in 6 months. So when it comes to making disciples, very low. Inviting to a small group, you'd think it'd be a little higher, but it's almost the same. It's actually less. I've invited someone else to my small group in the last 6 months. Really, really incredible. Custom survey, those were the custom questions we created as a church. I'd say overall people are generally satisfied and optimistic. Not everyone is. The majority of negative feedback revolves around secondary preferential matters, whether that's the way the pastor dresses, the music pastor, the temperature of the sanctuary. There was some comments on stylistic changes at 11 o'clock music-wise. There's preferential things like we need to sing more hymns, or we need to have more time to sing and more time in the preaching. There's a consistent theme, I think, in the legitimate criticism. Well, it's all legitimate, but the criticism that is not preferential. There was a consistent theme that there's a greater need for prayer time and time to respond to the Lord during times of worship. I think that's also connected to the prayerful dependence weak point in our survey. The other thing was overall people are generally... Hey, you just said that. Okay. All right. I had another... All right, final thoughts. Final thoughts, I think we've got a parking problem we can solve. We've got many areas of health that are encouraging, great things happening. We've got significant areas that need to be improved, such as mobilization of volunteers, that was a weak point. Leadership development, there is no way to, if you are a leader, for you to develop in your leadership, no clearly defined way. More engagement in personal disciple making and evangelism. Those were all very low points. And then a corporate pursuit of intimacy with God. Whether or not we're pursuing God individually, that is what that is. But there seems to be this general consensus that as a church, if you're going to make Broadview an individual, that individual does not do enough depending on God, praying, seeking intimacy with the Lord. So church-wide, we're not doing a good job there. It seems to be the general. Whether we are or not, we can talk about that, but it's perceived as though it's not there. Personally, I think we are way too large. Can't spell. We are way too large and financially capable. You notice there's monies. We're too big and we're too financially capable to not become a church planting church and not be engaged in some kind of long-term missionary deployment. I'm pulling this from the financial strength of the church, the mission mentality of our church, the weakness in leadership development. That weakness could be addressed and supplemented the strength of our financial capacity and mission-mindedness to become a church-planting church, a church that plants other churches, and sending missionaries, not just going on mission trips, but actually sending people 6 months, 8 months, 2 years at a time to some of these overseas partners that we have. We got a call from the IMB to see more of this. And just like every disciple is called to make disciples, I think the thing you see in the New Testament is churches are called to plant churches. The solution isn't just doing social ministry. The solution is to plant churches. We are a church that goes on mission very often, but we're big enough now, financially strong enough now to be a sending church. So not just going and doing, but actually sending people out. We must be good stewards of the size of our church. We could be more generous. Think of this parable of the unjust steward. He used for himself worldly wealth to amass for himself friends in this age. So when his money ran out, he'd have friends to go to. Or the story of the talents, where the person invests the talents and multiplies it fivefold, whereas the other one takes what he has and he buries it in the sand. He's the wicked servant because he didn't invest well all that he had been given. I think one of the things that we need to consider is not just, thank you, Lord, that we've got so much money and strength, but how do we need to steward this strength so that we more appropriately manage the church capital. I guess you want to say that, but the church capital that you've given us. Those are some things I think about as I look at the data. And I guess that's it. All right, your thoughts?
On the survey, the 90 so people that took the survey, do you have a breakdown of the age of those or the demographics of the people who took the survey? I know we don't know, I know it's anonymous, but there's also questions about age and everything else.
Right. It's there. I haven't looked at it very much, so I don't know the general age of the persons who took the surveys. I would think it's generally older. Of course, when I look at the custom
Some of
survey,
the answers that it was, an older clientele. I mean, I'm saying that.
Well, the only reason I'm asking, if we're going to go off these results, we need to make sure that we're really representing. I know it's statistically viable, but is it a true representation of all the demographics of the church?
right? It's a good point.
The younger people are, I would think, sometimes less likely to take the survey sometimes.
Oh yeah, very much so.
I mean,
Too busy.
Right.
I don't have 15 minutes.
Yeah.
I got to check my Facebook.
That's probably 35 registered.
Yeah. If you want to look at the custom survey, there's some really interesting reading. When people had opportunity to actually share their hearts, interesting stuff. Just looking through here, it seems like a lot of 940, few 825s, predominantly 940, 940, 11, few 825s, more 825s, more, it's equal 940, 825, 940, 11. I'd say 940, 11 makes up the majority. 825 probably makes up maybe 30%.
It's not the questions. I know when I took it, where I didn't know how to answer some of them.
Yeah, I've heard that frustration. The surveys are addressing areas of the church I don't know about, or how do I know how many people they invited to church, that kind of thing, which is valid. Of the points that you thought, wow, that's really valid and that's really kind of concerning. Anything that stands out?
I don't know what the numbers should look like. One thing I noticed, the 940 worship service, there's 205 adults that went, and then the 11 o'clock Sunday school, there was only 79 adults, which seemed a bit off to me. So I don't know where that should stand, but...
So it's 11 o'clock, small group. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
I think some of the 940 church crowd goes to the 8:30 earlier Sunday school. That's why a few of them like to go to the early Sunday school, go to church at 9:40, and then they go feed the lunch crowd.
There's that, and there's the midweek groups that meet. A lot of 940 people meet in the middle of the week, and that is not reflected in the statistics.
You also have your teachers.
Right. It is to get to your point, it is a problem. It's something that we've addressed, and we addressed it by creating the midweek groups, because we saw the trend of more and more people going to 940 service and less people going to 11 o'clock in small groups. And so we didn't think people were going to go to small group at 11 if they weren't going already. So we created the midweek groups to try to push the younger crowd into a midweek small group. And we saw a tremendous increase in midweek groups as far as participation. Some of it's double dipping, so I don't know how much of it is really true. People getting plugged in who weren't plugged in. I'd say it's still a problem, but it's something that it's on the radar. Anything else?
Wes, to your earlier question, maybe 4 areas stood out to me: prayer, discipleship, evangelism, and leadership development.
Those are good.
Personal evangelism.
How many of you have a general agreement with those 4 things? I'd say I certainly do. Anything else you'd add to some of these?
I would just, for the prayer one, I was thinking, when I answered that question on the survey about the spontaneous prayer, it was kind of convicting, thinking about a lot of the times, small groups are in service, like I know exactly when we're going to go pray. You know, I know exactly that it's more of a routine almost. Not that that's a terrible thing for there to be a routine of it, but when it said spontaneous, it kind of was like, oh, I don't know how often we see that.
Right.
Well, even the whole congregation, a lot of times I don't say, let's pray. There's a song, boom, and it's like the whole realm of just pray.
Right. That's true. There's a little bit of it. It's more than it used to be. We've talked about this as staff in our worship services, that there's not enough hear and respond. There's a lot of hear. There's not enough respond back. So there's been a few steps in the right direction, but maybe not enough.
Well, the issue with that too is like it's hard to plan while having spontaneous. You know what I mean? Like it kind of gets.
Mm-hmm.
I understand the reason that it is formalized, you know, but.
Well, I think too, and it was on the survey too, this is for a church I belong to, have 3 services. And when you have 3 services, you're in a time crunch. I mean, let's face it, it's real and it's there. We are in a time crunch. I mean, you have people waiting to get in the next service, and so you've got to move things along. What we got to figure out, is, and I think that has a lot to do with some of the things that's up there.
Yeah. Yeah, and you can't change the fact that we have 3 services.
Right.
But you can say, all right, here's an issue, here's what we have, and how do we move forward? Now, we're not going to do that tonight. Don't go there. But the problems are good. Bring out the issues. It's so tempting to justify and this is why. But we want to take these are valid areas of strength and valid areas of weakness. How can we capitalize on our strengths? How can we address the needed weaknesses? Got to be addressed. And the things we're just not going to be good at as a church, then we don't have to be good at everything. Our church is unique, and so we need to take that uniqueness, leverage it, and utilize our strengths for maximum impact.
And I think personal evangelism goes back to discipleship, really, because if you got strong disciples, personal evangelism is taking place. And that's, to me, I don't know if I would necessarily separate them just because that is the overflow of a disciple, is that he's multiplying, he's going out, he's being evangelistic. That's just my thought when I look at that. And maybe that's why our leadership development, is poor, because we're not making disciples. Therefore, we're not pulling people into the mission of the church more successfully.
And I think this goes into leadership development. There was a question on there, I can't remember exactly how it worded, but something about how do you feel like it's just the pastors, I can't remember how they worded it, but do you feel like the pastor's only the one in charge type thing? And I think sometimes we do say that's Roger's job, or that's Brian's job, or that's Wes's job. I don't have the ability to do that kind of thing. But I think that goes into the leadership development, kind of seeing the church as your own.
I want to capitalize on that point. Do you generally agree that if our church was going to answer the question, how can I phrase this? Whose responsibility is it to make disciples in the church? Letter A, Pastor West. Letter B, all the staff. Letter C, every believer. You think that, generally speaking, most people would say that's the staff's job?
I would say so, because, unless you're really in the Word, we're supposed to go do that. We know that. But you have such a young, diverse crowd now that maybe they don't understand it. And even old school, we always thought the pastor did everything.
That was the model.
That's it. 24/7.
Yep. I can't get well in the hospital unless the pastor prays over it.
That's right. Or my feelings get hurt because the pastor didn't show up.
Right. Georgia?
I think maybe we have that head knowledge, but whether we put that into practice or whether we build, heart knowledge.
Right.
We know that, but we don't do it.
Yeah, Broadview has a lot of mature believers. They've got it up there, but it hasn't translated to activity.
When I went to Romania years ago and lived there for a little bit, I was really taken back. A common question I got asked by Romanian believers: "What's your job in the church?" And I was like, "What do you mean? What's my job?" Well, every believer has a job. What do you do? And so I was like, "Oh." I mean, that was really convicting, and that's when, they, when someone became a believer and made a disciple, that was immediate. This is your job. You have a job, and this is what you're going to do. And so that was really eye-opening. I was like, we don't really do that.
Yeah.
Just kind of depend on other people to step up to the plate and do something.
Right. We call in the U.S. we call them church services. I'm going to service you, spiritually, get you all good again.
Yeah, and honestly, when people become a new believer at our church, I don't know. I know the kids have a new believer class, but that might be. Well, I guess we're not really.
Don't sound
But yeah.
All right, areas of anything else on weaknesses before you, Corey?
Well, there was a lot under the mission section that seemed to indicate that there's a disconnect between what we're doing and how it impacts our community. There was quite a few about the local community, and I don't know that it's not necessarily not impacting the local community, but there's certainly a perception that we don't understand how we're impacting.
I think it goes more into not publicizing it. Most people don't understand. Yeah. This is we talk about mission here. That's always a strong point.
I'll just call it a disconnect in communicating wins. Mondo talked about this a couple of weeks ago. He said one of the reasons that pastors are generally more optimistic about the church is because the pastor surrounds themselves with, I don't know what you would call it, the strong people in the church, people who are close, involved, doing things. They're optimistic because they're in the trenches where the cool things are happening, but that's not the whole church. There may be a vast majority of the church, more than is necessary, on the outer banks who are not hearing, not seeing, not engaged, and that's a breakdown in communication.
How does our younger people know about the West location?
How many of them know?
No, how do they know? Because
That's a good question. They may not even know.
That's
I've heard, I don't know how many new people have said, we have a West Campus.
exactly.
Yes, do a pretty poor job.
Or who's the old man in the office? In the gray hair.
Yeah, that's Vernon's office. Who's Vernon?
Is that really Jesus in there?
That's Wes's restroom.
All right, real quick, anything else on weakness? We're talking major ship will sink if we don't correct these things.
Do you think some of it really goes back to communication, that maybe there's more of that going on than what gets communicated to everyone as a whole?
Yeah, I think a lot of it's that.
The only thing
because we don't know what other people are doing.
Yeah.
And you don't really broadcast that.
Sure.
That may go to the leadership development piece of it. If we're truly developing leaders, we're going to be plugging people into those spots and they're going to know more about things. The more people know about those things, the more they serve, the more they serve, the more they
Sure.
I think a lot of this discipleship starts as a small group. Well, at least for me, I'm an amazing small group leader, and who is, I can see where he's constantly doing that to build us and teach us and to learn. And I don't know what goes on in other small groups because I've never left his.
Well, they're not all like that. But yes.
I didn't even point them out first.
Sorry. What about strengths? We're talking, this is so unique about Broadview. We have got to capitalize on this. Not every church has this, but our church has this, and it needs to factor into how we move forward.
Hospitality.
Okay, you have to unpack that a little bit.
All right. Just making people feel part of the church. I think we do a really, really good job at doing that. And it doesn't matter if they're student, adult, married or single or divorced or whatever. Huh? I don't think it was a weakness. I don't think hospitality is. I think I think,
True assimilation maybe, but.
No, you're right. Hospitality is a huge win for us. People feel loved. They feel welcomed here. Those are always high marks there.
There's a difference in feeling welcome and being plugged in.
Right. What finances? You know, the average church, Lucky, what's the number? Is it 175? Is that the average church attendance in America?
Less than that.
It's less than 175?
Closer down to
125.
125. Most churches in the world, 125, maybe would have a budget, I don't know, maybe 100,000. Pay the preacher and a few things, you know. This is incredible. The church, our church for our size is incredible with the finances. And then you take the size of our church, which is larger. We're in the upper 2% of churches in the world. Only 2% of churches have 500 or more. And so that makes us unique. We can't just say, thank you, Lord, let's keep doing church like everybody else does it. That's a unique gifting and a unique responsibility. So finances, and we can just say attendance, I guess, or size.
I think we're strong on doctrine too.
So I'll go ahead and suck up. I think our leadership is good. They
I'll write that one down.
I mean, there might be one weak spot.
I think overall we have a true desire to seek what God wants for us.
All right. What about strengths that are unique to us that are not common in other churches?
I'd say accessibility
A lot of this is-
to leaders.
Say that again?
Accessibility to leaders. Like, for me personally, being able to reach out to you.
Yeah, not everyone in our
to
church has
Roger,
that.
Or to, in all honesty, it's the leadership not only for our family, it's just the accessibility to our pastor or to our youth minister or our children's minister or whatever. I think that is very unique. I talk to many people who go to different churches and I'm like, yeah, I got my pastor's cell phone number.
Yeah, my point is most of our church members wouldn't have that kind of access. But it's because you were an unchurched family, and I focus and think about and I'm consumed with unchurched people. I'm an evangelist. I'm passionate about it. So when I knew you and Mason were unchurched and you were thinking about coming to Broadview, I made targeted you.
He fired the secretary that gave it out.
So there's a basket.
$100 you couldn't do it.
That's a big one.
But I mean, point taken. I think the leadership's generally speaking.
I think what we do for children and youth in our church is special.
How's it unique?
It's unique in the fact that our leadership really, truly cares for the kids. It's not just
Leadership as a whole.
They care about the spiritual growth, not just.
As a whole.
It's not just babysitting during a church service. They actually care about the spiritual growth of the kids.
Volunteers have callings, I feel like.
Linda, you need to say what you said again. Thank you.
What I hear from the outside is everybody's always shocked when they come to like our men's breakfast and see how many participants we have at our men's breakfast or our women's retreats and things like that, and how many are involved in things like that for our size church. I don't know if they think we're a small church or what, but they're just always shocked. Oh, how many do you have doing this, you know? And they're comparing it against their church, which is about the same size, and they're nowhere near those numbers, and they're saying, what do y'all do?
Oh, okay. Yeah. So you're talking church of similar size to ours? Okay.
I think one unique thing that we do too is offer personal spiritual development, like writing out media and stuff like that. I don't think a lot of churches capitalize on stuff. I mean, yeah, maybe the mega churches do, or real big churches, but I think I know that it kind of bounces against the discipleship side of it, but if people really use it, I mean, that's a sweet tool that not a lot of churches offer to their, just people who come, I mean, I don't know if you want to put that up there or not, but.
My dad said it.
church. My dad's at a pretty large, growing church, and when I told him that we had right now media for everyone, he was like, wow, y'all did that? He was like, we looked at that, but we kind of thought it was too expensive.
Well, you got to work a deal.
So,
I know how to work a deal.
he was saying that was really awesome that we offer that with the size that we are.
Right. That's a good point.
Something that our emphasis on missions is a strong point. I think it should be at one of the very top.
I would agree with that.
I think our missionary mindset is unique.
We were church hopping before we found this church, and we actually spent several months in a few different churches, and something that we found that was different here is the diversity of the different services, the options that you have. Because the 3 churches we went to, they had 3 services, and they had 3 identical services. And here we experienced the earlier service, because that's the one we always went to before. We're like, oh, okay, yeah, this is kind of old school, no offense, but that's because that's what I liked. But Jana was a little different, obviously, because I was raised out in Tosi, and I like the hymns and that kind of thing, and I've been converted now. I love the worship. You can't be loud enough now. But then we came to the 9 o'clock service, and it was like a different experience, and one that really, the worship time is what really, that, and I think we talked about it, being sound doctrine. I've never really experienced a sermon where we were in the Word and it made sense to me. And it was like, wow. It wasn't like, this is a story and this is what I want to teach, but it was teaching a story through the Word and using specific Scripture and reading Scripture and a lot of Scripture.
All right, so 2 things there. I think it is unique. Broadview seems to be truly multi-generational in the sense that there's an intentional focus on an older generation, whereas a lot of churches are forced to say we're going to have to target one, or some churches say we're really big, but we're only going after young unreached. Broadview has intentionally in the leadership said we will always have a service in which we pursue an older generation. It's twofold reasons. One is because there's a lot of unchurched older people in our city. 2, there's a lot of really deep and mature disciples in our church who need to somehow get engaged in discipling the younger people in our church, and if you run them off, then they won't be there. So this is a convictional thing in our leadership, but it seems to be for real, and at the church there's a genuine connection. It's not 2 different churches. It seems to be a nice interlink. And that's unique. Not every church has that.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say, is I feel like not every church has the ability to where, like, I feel very close to a lot of the senior adults, and that's not common for, 2 different generations to serve together, to be close,
right.
And, to have opportunities to.
Right.
I think we're very strong in our missions with our youth and our younger kids that we send on missions and do local missions here.
All right.
Family mission trip blew my mind when I heard that for the first time. I was like, what? The whole family mission trip?
All right, at 7:02, here's what I'm going to do. I'll take a screenshot of this board. I'll email you the board with our major areas of weakness, unique structural strengths, I guess. And next time we meet, we will visioneer. We will think vision. What vision is saying here's where we need to focus. Here's what we have. Here's our strengths. How can we pursue what it is we believe the Lord wants us to become in light of this reality? So first thing we'll take, I think the first exercise is getting out of our small thinking. If we had unlimited resources, we knew we couldn't fail, what would we pursue God for? We got to start thinking big, not small. And then we'll say, okay, here's who we are. What are some goals? What does vision look like in the future? So you'll get an email with this information. I want you to keep thinking about it. I'll try to package it in the email so it's nice and succinct and it's not so disjointed. And then we'll have 2 weeks before we meet again. And when we meet again, the fun part begins. Okay? Any questions from anybody? Any last comments? You got to get them in before we're done. All right, let's spend some time praying. I'm just going to leave it silent. You can say a sentence prayer, more than a sentence prayer, whatever's on your heart, and then I'll dismiss us. Let me stop this broadcast so we're not praying around the world.